is Christian Mauder. I'm a lecturer at the University of Göttingen in Germany. Well, when my master's thesis was in its final stages, I realized that the topic I had discussed there, namely late medieval Egyptian history, was just something that I was really fond of and that I wanted to explore in greater depth. So I was looking for a PhD topic at that point of time, and I was working in the university library with a collection of books that had been donated by the widow of the late Ulrich Hamann, who was one of the founding fathers of this field within Islamic history in Germany. He passed away much too early and had a massive book collection. And in one of the books that had been donated to the library, I found a curious text that I had never heard about that consisted of kind of proceedings of the Salons that a late medieval Egyptian Sultan by the name of Qāniṣawh al-Ghawrī had held at the Cairo citadel. And this book was insofar fascinating as it had all these handwritten notes by Ulrich Hamann on it, and it seemed that he wanted to work on that at a later point of time before he passed away. And so with the help of that notes, I immediately realized that that is something that I would love to look into and to work on. So the starting point was really more or less coming across this book by accident. My project looks at a late medieval Egyptian court as the center of cultural, religious and political life of the period. Within European contexts, court culture is a big topic and has been ever since the 1950s, I would say. But within the Islamic world, that's not something that has been looked into. So what I basically do is putting court culture on the map in Islamic studies in a way, especially for that late period. It has usually been thought that this was a period of cultural decline where there shouldn't be anything like a sophisticated court culture. And what I do is I use the quite detailed sources on the court of this specific Egyptian ruler to outline what court life could be like in the Islamic world of the early 16th century. Well, there are two main challenges. The first has to do with the size of the project, actually. I came across that book that belonged to Ulrich Hamann, as I mentioned, and it's an edition of two of the main sources I'm working with that was done in Egypt in the 1940s. And I thought that would be a great basis for a PhD project, 200 pages of edited text with an index and everything that looked pretty promising at that point of time. But what I did over the course of my project was I went to Istanbul and looked at the original manuscripts that were the basis of this edition. And in Istanbul, it turned out that the editor had left out about 2/3 of the text without indicating that. So rather than working with a nice edited text, I found myself suddenly in front of these manuscripts, and while in Istanbul, I discovered also a third text that had not been identified before as belonging to this kind of literature. An American colleague who was really helpful in getting me access to that pointed out that this is definitely part of the literary genre, and he was right. So instead of working with two rather small edited texts, I was now sitting in front of these three manuscript sources, which meant that I had to develop my skills in working with medieval manuscripts. That's something I really enjoyed over the course of the project, but it was something that I had to do at a quite early point. The other thing is that I'm basically trained as an Arabist. I also have a degree in Persian studies, but my main research language is Arabic. However, the sources I'm working with are actually demonstrating the kind of multilingual atmosphere of that court, meaning that there is not only Arabic material, but also Persian material and material in two Turkic dialects. And at the beginning of my project, I didn't know Turkish at all, so what I did is I used some of the time at an early point to actually learn Old Ottoman Turkish to work with these kind of sources. Again, something I really enjoyed, but that was kind of a challenge that I faced early on. I think my planned book is going to make contributions to several debates, but two of them are the most important from my point of view at the moment. The first is the point that I already mentioned, that courts actually play a role in the late medieval period in the Islamic world. That's something that has not been seen in the field so far for various reasons that have to do with the history of the field itself and its Orientalist backgrounds, one could say quite frankly. And I think that my book will make it possible for Islamic studies to open a dialogue with other fields in the humanities who have long looked at the courts of pre-modern rulers, be it in Europe or be it in East Asia, South Asia. So that's something where Islamic hate studies will finally be able to join the interdisciplinary debate once my book and a number of other publications that look at a similar topic will be out. And the other thing is there is still within the field this idea that over the course of the later medieval period, the Islamic hate world was in cultural decline. I think we all know these stories about early Arabic caliphs having Greek philosophical texts translated and having this blended court culture of Abbasid Baghdad in the 9th or 10th century. But then the idea is that this, at one point or the other, more or less comes to a stop, which has to do with the invasion of the Mongols in the 13th century and other cultural and political and social reasons. But my sources show that in early 16th century Egypt, there were actually lively debates about topics that just shouldn't be there according to the narratives. Things like philosophical debates about how humans get knowledge about the universe, theological debates that were much more profound than what one would expect in that period usually. And we also have the Sultan and other members of the political elite actually joining into these debates, which is something that has been thought to be more or less impossible in that late period. So I think my research will contribute to that ongoing a revisionist approach of questioning this decline narrative from a particular perspective, namely from the perspective of court studies. Well, there are mainly two things that I would like to mention here. The first is these sources that I work with refer to a broad array of different fields of Islamic hate learning of the period, be it philosophy, as already mentioned, but also Arabic literature, Quranic exegesis, and of course, I can't be a specialist in all of them. So to a certain degree, I'm just dependent on people who have spent most of their academic careers working within these specific fields to tell me what they think is relevant about my sources and what could make a helpful contribution to larger debates within the field. And here several of the faculty members, but also some of the fellows that are here with me, for example, Walid Saleh, who is an internationally acclaimed authority on Quranic exegesis, are really people that I absolutely look forward to talk about my sources or have already talked about, and that's one of the huge benefits that the program is offering me. The other thing is that I'm really looking forward to organizing a workshop within the fellowship program. There are now a couple of people in Islamic studies who have an interest in courts of the late middle and especially the early modern period, but so far there has not really been a venue to bring these different approaches to the topic together, at least from the perspective of intellectual and social history. And that's one of the things that I would like to do as part of the workshop that I'm organizing within the program. What I would hope for is that I would have a chance to get, before the book is actually out, feedback from various specialists within Islamic studies who could, from their point of view, be it political historians or historians of intellectual history or social historians, who could make a short statement that should be at the back of the book about how my research is important within the text that would basically 5 to 10 sentences or how much it would ever be. I would try to focus on some of the things that I just said about the debate about the decline narrative in the later Islamic hate project and how my research results question these things, and also the thing that court studies finally deserve to be on the map of Islamic studies. But I would also highlight the importance of working with manuscript sources that have not been studied before. As I said, if I would have relied in my project only on the edited text, the results would have been very different and not in a good way. They would have been incomplete and really shaped by the choices that the editor made that I mentioned earlier. And that's something that is still very common in our field, that we rely on edited texts that do not fulfill the standards that are absolutely common in fields like Latin or Greek philology. And I think my book my project is a particularly glaring case of what these things can lead to, but still it's an important reminder that we have to go back to the manuscript sources themselves.